Hey everyone, George here and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be doing a little bit of maintenance that we talked about a couple of videos ago. This was a three-part series on maintaining your tanks. Today is the part 2 of that series, and we're going to cover a 50% water change. We're going to cover trimming your plants, a little bit of maintenance on that, and also vacuuming your substrate out while you're doing your water change. A couple of different things that are going on here that are going to make this a little bit difficult, but we're going to go through the motions anyway, is that I don't have a lot of plants that really need to be cut back. The maintenance on my tanks is so well done all the time that I really don't have a ton of stuff that needs to be cut back. I was hoping to find something in the gallery here that needed that, but we're going to find something in one of the tanks just to go through the motions of showing you what to do on that late month 50% water change that comes, like I said, at the end of the month. This is something that I would normally do, and I just don't have a ton of plants right now to cut back, but I do see some in the tank that we're going to be playing around with here that do need some cutting back just a little bit. And so we'll go ahead and do some of that. As far as the vacuuming goes, again, I don't have anything that really needs to be vacuumed, but I'm going to show you the tools that are necessary to do that. They're not expensive. I don't want you to be intimidated by it. It's something that you can do easily yourself. As you can see from all of these tanks, the very white sand and everything, I don't have a lot of waste at the bottom of my tanks because I don't overfeed, number one. And I don't have a lot of plants that have die-off and algae and stuff like that that's all over the place. So it's really hard to explain this to you without actually showing you. But as you can see from the tanks here, that I just don't have a lot of that going on. But I am going to show you how to do it, and I'm going to make sure you understand the tools that you need. They're not expensive. I don't want you to be intimidated by it at all. If you're somebody that's new to the hobby or whatever, you don't have to go out and spend a fortune on this stuff. You can buy, in fact, I have a more sophisticated system for doing water changes, but I'm going to show you what most people would use to do a water change so that it's not something that's so out of whack that you're going to be run off by it and say, geez man, I don't want to put a system together like that that's so difficult and so expensive that I just don't want to put the money or the time into it. So we're gonna use something really simple here, and in doing so, we're going to at least show you what a 50% water change looks like in a tank. We're going to get through that in just a second, so hang in there with me and we'll be right back. So welcome back, and one of the things I want to talk about first before you get started on doing this 50% water change is making sure that you put something down on your cabinet or your furniture, whatever you happen to be using for this, to make sure that you are not getting water all over the cabinet. Now, some cabinets are made specifically for the tank that you have on there, and others are just pieces of furniture that you may have either picked up or you might have already in your home that you want to use. Now, I recommend, if you can, just putting a towel down basically, because that's going to catch any drippings of water that may harm the surface of this particular tank. Now, I don't know what this is made out of, to be honest with you. I think it's pretty solid, but I don't want to take a chance on water spots or anything like that. Protecting the furniture is just as important as keeping, your tank in good shape as well. So before we get started here, we want to make sure that we've got all the tools necessary to do the work that we want to do. The three parts that we were going to cover in this part of the video, as I said earlier in my introduction for part 2 of this series, is we're going to do a 50% water change. We're going to trim up any plants. I don't really see a lot of plants that need to be trimmed in here, or any of my tanks, to be honest with you. So unfortunately, we're going to do a little bit of that, and I'm going to show you, but it's not going to be that involved. We're going to talk about how you would do that, however, and I think that will really help you in the big picture to understand what's necessary, like when you're doing these 50% water changes at the end of the month, to make sure that you are incorporating this trimming of your plants if it's necessary. If it's not necessary, you skip that. You don't worry about it. I don't know how many tanks each of you have. Obviously, we all have a different amount of tanks. I've got a ton of tanks, so there's usually something that needs to be covered, but I am so up on my maintenance all the time that I really don't have anything really to trim back. There is some leaves over on this plant over in the corner here, and maybe one in the center or two that I'm going to trim off just because they aren't looking the healthiest. They're probably not necessary to do that, but we're going to do it anyway. So anyways, the tools that we're going to need for this, number one is a pitcher. And this pitcher here is about 1.5 gallons. Now your tank is going to have approximately, this is a 20-gallon tank, but obviously it doesn't have 20 gallons of water in here. By the time you get substrate in here, which I put a lot of substrate in here, your rock, your sponges, your filters, your heater, your pump, and all of that, you're really down to about 13.5 to 14 gallons is what I figured for this 20-gallon tank. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't put what 20 gallons is recommended for a particular fish. You can't put that fish in here because all tanks have substrate, they have hardscape, they have all of the things, and everybody understands that there's disbursement of this water, and it's not truly 20 gallons of water that's going to be in this tank. So anyways, your hose is just a simple siphon hose. If you're going to do a vacuum on this, basically this hose attachment, you're going to look for the end that you would use for that, and you're going to stick that on there, and basically when you put this inside the tank, you're going to siphon the bottom of the tank out with it, and basically just go along the bottom of the tank and siphon it out. This isn't necessary for this tank either because there's hardly any fish in here. So it's really not necessary, and I don't have any other tanks that were ready for this particular maintenance right now. So we're just going to have to kind of show you the tools here that you would use, and as I said, you're going to siphon from here, and then you're just going to go along the bottom of your tank and vacuum up anything that might be in there that is kind of nasty and needs to be removed from their excess species from the fish, any dead plants, anything like that that needs to be removed. As you can see, this is a pretty pristine tank, so there isn't a lot that has to be done to it. The water change is going to be the most important thing in the trimming of the plants today. So we'll do a siphoning with the vacuum on a tank here in the near future. Maybe in our third part of this series we'll actually do a vacuuming on a tank that I'll save specifically for that event. And anyways, long story short is we're going to come back and we're going to start doing the maintenance on this tank, and just hang in there with me. We'll come right back to it here in just a second. So doing a 50% water change on a tank is very important to do at least once a month. Now, I have expressed to you that I do a quarter of the tank at least once a week, sometimes twice a week, and then I do a full 50% water change at the end of the month. I am a day or two behind on doing that simply because I wanted to record it as I was doing it, so that's basically what I'm going to do now. And then we're going to trim some plants up. We're going to do a little bit of that and show you the importance of trimming off pieces of plants that are either dead or dying or compromising the health of the overall plant itself. Anytime you have a plant that is yellow or is brown or is dying in some way, it's really sucking the energy from the plant itself and ultimately is not helping your tank. Now, as you can see, crystal clear water in this tank, but as I've said before, crystal clear water does not mean water that is free of ammonia, nitrites, nitrates, etc. Now, I have tested this water this morning just because I was curious. I typically don't test my water that often because I know with the amount of water changes that I do and the maintenance that I do on the tanks that I'm likely not to have issues like that. Everything was absolutely perfect. I had about 25 parts per million on the nitrates, which is absolutely right where it should be. You should always have in your cycle the nitrates at a level of around 25 to 48 parts per million. That is the sign of a healthy tank. Now, if you are getting less than that or you have no nitrates, I would be more concerned than if you have too many nitrates. Both are bad, but if you have no nitrates at all, then you've got a problem with your cycle somewhere along the way, and that is a concern. So we're going to do a 50% water change on this tank today, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to do that, and then we're going to trim up some plants, and then the last thing we're going to do, as I said, was to scrub the sides of the walls and the glass down. Even though this tank looks beautiful as it is right now, I mean, it's obviously a very stunning looking tank, but even though we have not got a reason to be concerned about that, this 50% water change is going to guarantee that these fish are in the best conditions that they can possibly be in. Now, as I said, this is a quarantine tank, and the reason why I'm working on this tank is because this is a tank that I've been featuring in the last couple of videos, and I will be adding some more plants to this here. I've got them on order, and also rearranging the rock and so forth in here. But today we're going to use this tank as an example as to how to do these water changes. So the first thing we want to do whenever we're doing a water change is to put something down so that we don't get the area in which we're taking the water from dirty. And we also want to unplug everything, as I said in other videos, with the exception of the light. In this particular case, we have a situation here where the strip that I have this plugged into, it's rather hard to separate everything from that strip, so I may have to pull the light up on this. I'm going to give it a second and see if I can do it without doing that. If you'll give me just a second. So it was actually easy to do and leave the light on because I want you to be able to see what I'm doing here. So basically we're going to take the lid off, set it aside. The lid on this is just a piece of glass. You can get it anywhere at any hardware store. It's not hard to find a lid for these at all. Any hardware store can cut you a piece of glass that will fit these, and that's basically what I've done here. You put some rubber bumpers on the top of it, and you pretty much have a good cover for the top of your tank. So as you can see, I have a hose in here. I'm going to start the siphon. Now, when I say a 50% water change, when you're looking at the tank, take into consideration, I'm scooting this over the top of the plants because some of the plants have some feces and stuff on them from the fish. You want to be careful not to suck on the plants with the tube because that can harm the plants. Just glide over the top. Anything that's sitting on them will be siphoned up pretty easily. But when I say a 50% water change, I want you to take into consideration that at the back of the tank there's probably this much substrate in here, and then when you're considering the rock in here, we're going to take basically about 3 of these big pitchers of water out of this tank, and that's roughly going to be, I think there's 15 gallons. I think we're going to take 4 out of here, excuse me. So these are 1.5 gallons each, and that would give us an opportunity to basically take half of the water, because there's not really 20 gallons in here. We have to keep in mind that 20 gallons is the size of the tank with nothing in there, no substrate, no rock, no plants, no anything that's going to disperse water, including your sponge filters, your heater, your pump. I mean, you have to consider all of those things that are in here. When it comes right down to it, you probably got about 10 gallons of water or 12 gallons of water in a 20-gallon tank. So there's no reason for me to let you watch me take this down here and wait on it. So I'm going to take the rest of the water out of here, and then I'll come back to you in just a second here. So you don't have to watch the whole process. Basically, I have put a couple of pitchers of water back into this particular aquarium. I did want to talk about a couple of the chemicals that I use on a 50% water change, and one that I use, well, actually one that I use all the time and one that I use on a 50% water change. Now, Stability by Seachem is something that I use on anything that is 50% or more of a water change. There's never really a case where you're going to do more than 50% of a water change, but if you had a serious situation in your tank, obviously that may be something that would be relevant to that. But that is basically a product. If you look at it closely, it tells you what it does. It's number one, it stabilizes the system for freshwater and marine tanks, so this is good for both. It rapidly and safely establishes the biofilter. So in other words, if you are starting a new tank and you want to get it off to a good start, there's instructions on the back on how to use that for the first 7 days to really get your tank off to a good start. It also talks about, if you're doing a 50% water change in there, to use a cap full of this when you're putting that much water back in, because it helps to reestablish the proper amount of good bacteria into your system. So it just stabilizes. It also is very good at helping to remove ammonia, nitrites, and nitrates as well. The second product here is Prime, and this is a water conditioner basically by Seachem. I like it. It smells a little bit bad because it's got kind of a rotten egg smell to it, but it's such a good product to use because it does similar things. It detoxifies the ammonias, the nitrites, and the nitrates that might be in your water, but it also removes chlorines and chloramides that would also be in your water. And you use, to every gallon, maybe, there's little rings inside the cap in there. The first ring is good enough. I'm going to do that right now because I haven't done it yet. So basically, I'm going to fill it up just a little bit, right about there, as you can see. I don't know if you can see with the camera or not, but it's about a quarter of a way, and I'll put that right in the water. And I rinse the cap out in there. That way you don't have nasty smelling stuff all over the cap. And anyways, that water is now ready to go back into your tank. Now, a little tip or a trick that I use to make sure that I'm getting the same temperature of water, all of my tanks are at 81 degrees. And what I've done with the sink that I use to do water changes is I have set that the lever on the sink to the exact spot. There's a little mark on there that I know is right at 81 degrees based on the temperature of my hot water heater. And so I can put it right there and be almost 100% assured that there is an 81 degree amount of water, 81 degree temperature of water going back into the tank, because you don't want to shock the fish with something that's off dramatically. Now, if you're off by a degree or two, it's not going to harm anything. Your heater is going to pick up on that really, really quickly, and the fish are probably not going to notice it very much. It's not going to bother them, let's put it that way. But that's a little trick. If you've got a faucet that you're using to do water changes, mark it right where you think it's about 81 degrees, and you can do that just by running the water and having a not a thermostat, but a thermometer in there, take that reading, and when you see it at 81 degrees, that it's constant for like 2 or 3 minutes at that temperature, you can easily just make a mark top to bottom so that the arm lines up exactly in that spot every time you're doing a water change. Now I'm going to go ahead and finish putting the water back into this tank, but before we do that, I want you to see that I have a dedicated sponge for every single tank that I have in my gallery. You don't want to cross-contaminate any kinds of nets, number one, sponges, another thing, or anything that's used to do maintenance on your tank, with the exception of your water pitcher, which you can rinse out with hot water and it's fine. But you want to have a dedicated sponge for a tank so that you can go in there and clean the glass and all the edges around the top of the glass and the back of it and all that. I do that once a month on my 50% water changes, just to make sure that those glass and parts on the inside are in really good shape. And as I said, that sponge is a dedicated sponge that is not used on any other tank, because you can have a problem in a tank with ick or something like that that can develop, or a parasite, and then you're cross-contaminating it by using it from one tank to the other. So I'm going to get the sponge on this, and we're going to do a little bit of cleaning. I'm going to show you how I do that, and we'll get back to it in just a second here. So the sponge that I'm using here is a sponge that all of us have typically in our kitchen. It's just basically sponge on one side and then a little bit of a nylon scrubber on the other. That's going to come in handy for, let me get this picture out of the way so you can see what I'm doing here. Anyway, it's going to come in handy for scrubbing the inside of the glass here without damaging it, but getting off anything that might be sticking to the glass. Stuff builds up over time. We do have a slime coating that basically all tanks have. That's great for autosinkless, plecos, for your snails and stuff like that, but it's not something that you want to let build up over time, because they can't eat all of it. And so anyway, I'm going to go ahead and show you how I clean the inside of this. I'm just going to move the camera a little bit so that you can see what I'm doing without me being in front of the camera, so that you are missing what I'm actually doing here. Let me move this up and down a little bit here so that you can see me cleaning this glass. So I go in here with the sponge, as you can see, and I'm basically just going along here and cleaning. Now you want to get in here where these plants are. Use your hand to get out of the way of them. And you're basically going to do that in the corners, up and down. You're going to do this on the back of the glass. This back here is a smoky glass. It's real glass, so you want to get that, and also where your water filters through in there. And of course you want to do the front as best you can as well. Trying to stay out of the way of the camera here. And you don't have to go crazy on it. Just a gentle scrubbing is all you need to do. And then of course on the far side as well, same thing. I'm basically just following the lines. And when I plant an aquarium, I usually plant everything far enough away so that I can get in there with a sponge like this and do the cleaning, because otherwise you're fighting against rocks and plants and things like that you don't want to do. So basically that's all I need to do right now. I've cleaned the inside of this. Now what I might do is sometimes go around the little flow valve here, and also take a look at these little compartments back here, see if there's anything on there. I do this so often that there really isn't anything there to speak of. So I'm going to come back in a second here. We're going to finish off with this, and then we're going to trim some plants a little bit. So I wanted to talk about a couple of different things, and that is trimming your plants. Now, I don't have a lot of plants to trim in this particular tank that need to be trimmed. I do see one over here that need to be cut off. I did fill it all the way to the top because what I like to do is have my plants all standing up, fully, so that I can examine them really well and see if there's anything that needs to be trimmed or to be removed. Now, any plant that is yellow, a leaf on it that's yellow or brown is something you want to remove, because basically what's going on with that plant is you have a plant that is sucking energy from the main part of the plant and taking energy away from the plant from growing healthy. So you want to remove that. Now, the only one I see on this particular one is because I keep up on the maintenance so well, even in quarantine tanks like this one, which, as you know, I'm going to be turning this into a show tank here soon. There really isn't much here that needs to be trimmed up, because if you're doing this once a month and you are maintaining your tank, you're not going to have a lot of die off of leaves or anything like that. And I've looked this tank over pretty well. I really don't see anything that stands out. What I am going to do is some of these plants that are not fully in place down here, I might get in here and move them around a little bit just to make sure that they are staying in place, and eventually they will attach themselves, and that makes it a little bit easier on you. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our scissors, and like I said, I have one particular leaf back here that's not a big deal, but I don't want it on here. I'm going to cut it down as far as I can to the base, and I'm going to get a clean cut on it and let it just float to the top. And as you can see, that's not even a really bad leaf. It basically just has some brown on it and a small hole, but it's unsightly to me, and it'll stimulate new growth in here that will make this plant look a lot better. So you're better off to take this off here and get rid of it than you are to leave it on here. As far as the rest of the tank goes, as I said, there's really nothing in here that is so terrible looking that it needs to be removed. There are some plants that have a little bit of lack of green to them, and that is just simply because they need to be fertilized a little bit more. Now that this is going to be a show tank, I'll be doing fertilizing on a weekly basis, at least a couple of times a week, and there are certain chemicals that I use to do that with. I'm not going to talk about that today because that's not really part of this video. When we come back, we're going to talk about a few other things that we do on maintenance, and we're going to get to that in just a second here. So I hope you got a really good understanding of how important it is to do these maintenances on your tanks, because it really does give you an upper hand on keeping your tank healthy. 50% water change is what we covered today. As I said, I don't want to make this drawn out, but your tank, if it's a 20-gallon tank, it does not have actually 20 gallons of water in it. So you have to kind of figure out where that level of water really is to take half of the water out of there. If you don't get exactly half, it's really not important. Doing a large water change is really a more accurate statement than saying 50%, because we're never going to be exact on it. Every tank is different. Every tank has slightly different substrate in it. Every tank has different kinds of rock that are porous rocks or really solid rocks, so they can vary quite differently from tank to tank. I always put about the same amount of substrate in there, so I kind of have an idea of how much water is in a 20-gallon cube, especially if it's a cube by water box, which is ones that I use a lot. I love their 20 gallons. They're perfect size for me to show off most of my tanks. Now, of course, I do have larger tanks, but I do know by putting about 4 inches of substrate in the back, and then coming down to about 1.5 to 2 inches in the front. So you've got that gradual incline that gives you that sense of depth, or that perception of depth that makes the tank look good from the front to the back. I know by doing that roughly how much water is in there. I apologize I didn't have a lot of time to do clippings today because I just don't have a ton of maintenance to do on plants. Plants grow year-round in our tanks. They're not seasonal like it is outside, so I'm constantly keeping up on that, and it also has a lot to do with the kind of lighting that you're using for your tanks. If you're using low-light plants and you're not using CO2, then your plants aren't going to go crazy, but they're still going to be healthy. As you can see, there's no CO2 being used on any of these tanks. I do occasionally use CO2 on certain tanks that I want this big lush look to have going on in that tank, but I just don't use it that much anymore because it's just not necessary. There are so many good fertilizers out there and supplements for CO2. For example, there's a product by Seachem called Excel, and that works really good in concert with another product by Seachem called Flourish. That really does not do the actual CO2 as in the traditional sense, but it mimics it enough to where your plants just look beautiful. And as you can see, I'm not lying to you, because if you look at all of my tanks that I have shown you in my videos and the one I showed you today, they look great. There's nothing in those tanks that would indicate that they're being deficient in any way as far as fertilizers or the health of the plants. So, and I also apologize that I did not get a chance to actually vacuum a tank out today. As I said earlier, we're going to save a tank for you, let it get nice and nasty, and somewhere down the road we'll do a whole video on that kind of maintenance. And we may be able to cover that in the next video, because the next series is going to cover real serious maintenance on your, not only on vacuuming your substrate and really making sure that that's nice and clean. This is a maintenance that we do about every 4 to 6 months, just depending on the tank. But we're also going to get really in depth into going back into the chambers of the tanks back here. Sorry about that with the light. The chambers of the tanks back here, where there's a lot of sponge, there's ceramic, and there's carbon in here. We also have a sock over in this area here, and then of course your pump is over here. This one has a secondary pump on here that's just being used as a demonstration for a company that has offered this up to me to demonstrate. I've talked about that in another video. So a really great little external pump for a tank this size. But anyways, we'll be cleaning these chambers out, and that's where you really get into the more heavy maintenance. Also, we'll be doing a maintenance on a canister filter, just to show you, because I do have canister filters on some of my other larger tanks around my gallery and around my home, and those need maintenance as well. So we're going to get into some more in-depth maintenance on your chambers on the back of your all-in-one tanks, as well as your canister filters, and we're going to really talk about cleaning up and replacing some of the filters and some of the carbon sacks, I guess they're called. They're really these little mesh bags that you can put carbon in. You can choose anything you want to put in there. There are some products that I prefer over others. Now these come with a carbon, an actual charcoal sack, and after the first time of using it, I usually replace it with a mixture of stuff that is a good product by Seachem that I use all the time. So when we get into that video next, we'll do that vacuuming. I apologize we didn't get to that today, and we didn't have that many plants to trim up either, but we're going to have plenty of time in the future. I've done some videos on trimming plants before. I will put that at the bottom of this video, so if you want to watch me trim some plants on one of my tanks here. I'll put a link to that down below here in the comment section, and you can go ahead and take a look at that video anytime you want and watch me trim plants. So again, I apologize that we didn't get a chance to do much trimming of plants today, and we didn't get a chance to really vacuum it out. But I hope that we covered some areas that help you to understand why these tanks look so good all the time. There is a really, it's just a certain amount of maintenance that if you do it all the time, like I said, a quarter of a water change once a week, twice a week if you can. I do twice a week because I got too much time on my hands, I guess. But if you do a quarter water change once a week, and then the fourth week of the month you do that 50% water change, and your tanks are really going to be in good shape. You don't have to test your water all the time. You can kind of get an understanding of what your water is doing by the behavior of your fish. If you're seeing your fish breathing hard, or they're having trouble, or they're struggling in some way, there's something wrong with that tank, and you better get in there and figure it out really quick. The first thing you're going to do is a water change if you see something like that. Then you're going to check with your kit to make sure that you know exactly if there's too much ammonia, too much nitrites, too much nitrates. I mean, it can be any number of those things. Your ammonia can look good, your nitrites can look good, and your nitrates can be off the scale. And all of those things can be deadly to your fish. It can burn their gills. It can do so many things to damage your fish. But your fish look healthy, and they're swimming good, and they're not breathing hard, and there's nothing going on like that, other than the chance that there's a fish being picked on by somebody in the tank. I mean, that just happens. That's kind of like the bully in the schoolyard. It just happens. So that's something that we'll get into in another video. But thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to leave some comments down below. Hit the like button. Give me a thumbs up on this video. Also, I would love it if you would subscribe if you haven't already. And also, hit the bell. And I know it's up in this corner because I'm finally learning after all these videos that it's right up here. Hit that bell so that any new content that I have coming out in the future is going to be something that you're going to be notified of. And we got a lot of fun stuff that's coming up here. We've got a new build that we're going to be doing on this 20-gallon here that we just worked on. We've got a bunch of new plants that are going to be going in there. Some rock that's going to be moved around a little bit, maybe a little larger piece of wood in that tank. We'll have to see what we're going to do with it, but that's going to be kind of fun. That'll be coming up in the next few weeks. And then over the next month or two, we talked about the discus tank that we're going to be doing in that 38-gallon Fiji, which is going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited about that one. And I just haven't had a chance to do a lot of videos on those kinds of big changes to a tank. But we're going to get to that here really soon. And I hope you'll join me. Thanks for watching today, and we'll catch you on the next one. Until then, we're out of here.